In today's My Hero Academia video we explain Deku's new quirk, the last one for all quirk. Also, only a small percentage of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video, let's go! The only clue we have to understand the final one for all quirk is the second user of one for all. And the most obvious is that he looks like an older version of Bakugo. There are far too many similarities which are very precise to claim that it is a mere coincidence. So there are two possibilities. Either this is literally Bakugo for some reason, or this person is related to Bakugo. That is, the final quirk is either Bakugo's explosion or a quirk that Bakugo's explosion quirk originated from due to the quirk singularity. Let's start with the first possibility, and thus with probably one of the most famous theories in My Hero Academia, the time travel theory. The fact that the second user of One for All was the leader of the group that tried to defeat All for One shows that he understood the danger of All for One and the future effects of his power better than anyone else. And that's pretty intriguing, because it's just impossible to ignore the fact that he looks like Bakugo, who's experiencing the full potential of All for One's evilness. It only makes sense that if, for example, the present Bakugo were to go back in time, he would become the leader of an organization that will try to defeat All for One, simply because he knows the future and what All for One is capable of. This possible connection becomes even more obvious when you consider how the transition went when he talked about how there might be something they could do to help Deku, just before Bakugo then arrived. So the question is whether Bakugo found Deku because of the second user, and if so, how that connection works. It definitely can't be direct, otherwise Bakugo would have said something. So it must be something the second user did, so that Bakugo could subconsciously understand Deku's location. Here of course we have to consider how communication works between the One for All vestiges and their living versions. The only example we have is All Might. We know that All Might does not know what is happening in the world of the One for All vestiges. However, it has been shown that everything All Might does is automatically transmitted to his One for All vestige. Now if we apply this concept to the idea that Bakugo and the second user are actually one and the same person from different times, it means that Bakugo would have no way of getting the information from his One for All vestige. However, there's a big difference between Bakugo and All Might, assuming that the time travel theory is true. Bakugo's vestige must be from the future, who then traveled back in time and received One for All in the past. This is extremely confusing because the connection is neither from the future nor the past, but literally both affect the present at the same time. So couldn't this theoretically change the way the connection between the living body and the One for All vestige works? This is mainly due to one of the most popular hypothetical time travel theories often used in movies. The core of this idea is that any knowledge from the past must also be knowledge in the present. So events from the past change knowledge in the present for people who are directly affected by time travel. That is, when you jump into the past, you set history on a trajectory where your future version gets new memories when you do things that your future version didn't do in the past. However, the problem with the My Hero Academia time travel theory is that people believe that the second user is actually from the future and then traveled back in time to a time when Bakugo wasn't even born yet. And thus it's hard to believe that he could affect Bakugo in the present, because to put it simply, he's the future version of Bakugo. But this is where it gets complicated. If the future version of Bakugo received One for All in the past, which is a quirk that originated from the past and is now a natural part of the present, then he has made his very existence a part of the past and thus a part of the present, even though he's actually from the future. This is because of the relativity of One for All, which directly affects the present. Things would be different if Bakugo were the one who brought the One for All quirk from the future into the past. This will destroy any possible causality, but due to the fact that he has made himself a vestige, he is no longer only from the future but also a part of the past and present. And due to the fact that he is Bakugo, this could have created a strange relationship in which Bakugo's future version is also the true past of the present Bakugo, even if he is older. To put it in the simplest way, we have two Bakugos from two different times, but due to the fact that the future Bakugo has connected to a present concept, One for All, in the past, which is now part of the true present, he has made himself a part of the true past even before Bakugo was born, and therefore a part of Bakugo's past and present because they are the same person. So the idea that future Bakugo from the past might have the ability to subconsciously communicate certain information to Bakugo without the present Bakugo noticing makes sense if you look at the time travel theory theory the way I explained it. And if that is the case, then the quirk that Deku will soon awaken is Bakugo's explosion quirk. Before my partner Yami continues with this My Hero Academia theory, please take a short moment to like this video. Thank you.
But even if the time travel theory is wrong, we cannot ignore the similarities between Bakugo and the second user. So they definitely must have some kind of connection. Imagine, there is literally no explanation why they are so similar. It would be extremely weird. They have the same behavior. Both seem to be loud and quiet at the same time. Both have the same face and hair. Both wear some kind of projectile glove with which they can shoot. Bakugo with his explosion quirk and the second user most likely with whatever his quirk is. We know it's definitely a projectile glove because he was aiming with his arm like it was a gun when he entered the room where he found Yoichi. So everything indicates that his quirk must have something to do with this projectile glove. If the second user is not Bakugo from the future, he could also be a reincarnation. But we have no evidence for this possibility. That leaves only one possibility. The second user is genetically related to Bakugo, and based on the equipment he wears, we can expect a similar quirk. Personally, we don't like the idea of a genetic relationship between the two, because why hasn't Bakugo ever heard of a family member who was the leader of the very first and probably largest resistance army that fought all for one when the first generation of quirk users emerged? That's something that should have been recorded in the family history, but Bakugo never mentioned anything like that. But who knows, maybe he just didn't want to talk about it, or there's a reason it was kept secret from him. So let's assume that they really are related and his quirk is not explosion but something similar. What could it be? Remember, in this case, this person is not from the future but is related to Bakugo, which means that his quirk cannot be anything crazy because he is one of the first generation of quirk users. What I mean by this is that we know that because of the quirk singularity, quirks become more and more complex, which means that at a certain point in the past, when the first people received quirks, the quirks were not too crazy, but rather simple, and later evolved into very complex quirks because genetics mixed together, creating stronger and more complex quirks, which continued to evolve over generations. So, considering the quirk singularity, all we have to do is to look at Bakugo's quirk explosion and think of a quirk from which the explosion quirk could have evolved. We know that Bakugo's explosions are produced by nitroglycerin, so a possible origin of this ability is to be found in the chemical production of nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin can be produced by acid-catalyzed nitration of glycerol. Glycerol is generally not known to be dangerous and is even commonly used in food, for example. So if you can eat it, it is probably unsuitable for a quirk. Furthermore, the industrial production of nitroglycerin often involves reacting the not dangerous glycerin with a mixture of concentrated sulfuric acid and concentrated nitric acid, and that's where it starts to get dangerous or extremely harmful. So a possible quirk could be acid, similar to Mina Arthido's quirk. To understand how genetic quirk developments work in this case, imagine if Mina and someone with a glycerol quirk had a child. Then that child's quirk would probably have the same quirk that Bakugo uses. This is because acid reacting with glycerol can produce nitroglycerin, which is the core of Bakugo's quirk. One can go further into the chemical process to find out more possible quirks that Bakugo's quirk could have come from. Not only chemical elements themselves, but also concepts could represent a quirk. So it is likely that the second user's quirk could have something to do with the chemical process of making nitroglycerin. Another possibility is that these gloves actually have nothing to do with the second user's quirk, but are simply a type of technology that people were using at that time. Remember, that the second user is from the first generation of quirk users, and thus people in that era relied on the effects of their physical weapons. So it is not too unlikely that people in the era of the first quirk users actually used all kinds of weapons to fight, not just quirks. This means that the second user's quirk could be something that can not only do damage, but rather something useful for support. For example, a communication quirk, or a healing quirk, or a sensory quirk, and so on. So that's it for today, folks. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to smash the like button, and if you are new to our channel, make sure you subscribe with the notification bell turned on. See you guys in the next video. Yami out.